I'm Adrienne Cullen. I'm originally from Ireland. I was treated at the University Medical Centre in Utrecht in 2010-2011. I went to the hospital for treatment. A sample of tissue was taken and sent to the laboratory, but the results didn't come back to my doctor, and he didn't see them for 2 years. And in all that time, the cancer was growing inside me. The response of the hospital was atrocious. We wanted an explanation of what had gone wrong and an apology, an acknowledgement that something had happened at their hospital, and we didn't get that. Well, unfortunately, we were driven to taking legal action. It took from 2013 to the end of 2015, so about 2.5 years, to finally get a settlement agreement with the hospital. We were also told that there would be a gagging clause in our settlement agreement with the hospital, and that really tore us asunder. But we also could not bring ourselves to sign a clause that says that we had no right to speak about what had happened to me in a hospital. And we couldn't do it. And that was one of the most stressful episodes that I have ever experienced in my life. It was very important in our case to go public with what had happened, because the only thing that hospital leaderships seem to respond to is being shamed in public. Hospitals are organizations and they're institutions, and they are deeply hierarchical, and the people at the top live and operate as though they are in a corporate world. They don't have the humility that the medical profession should be defined by. And I think that that change has to happen from the bottom up, because the change is not going to happen from the top down, because the top has been too comfortable where they are. It's all too easy for the patient to be the small person still, and nobody is fighting on our side. When hospitals fail, patients are damaged once. If it isn't handled properly for them, they're damaged twice.
Well, this makes you fall silent for a bit. This is quite a moving testimony by Adrienne Cullen, and it's confronting to see, but it is a suitable introduction for this 5th Adrienne Cullen lecture, Open Disclosure After Serious Harm. A warm welcome to everyone for this 5th Adrienne Cullen lecture. We are very thankful to her for encouraging us to keep learning from our mistakes or things that didn't go as planned. And by being transparent, we can prevent making the same mistakes again. And by being open to patients and their loved ones, we can prevent adding more harm to a situation that is already very tough and unbearable. We were able to show you this video clip because Adrienne Cullen's husband, Peter Kluski, gave us permission to do so. A special welcome to Mr. Kluski, and by extension, Adrienne's family and friends and guests from Ireland who are joining us today. Also, a special welcome to Ambassadors Brendan Rogers and Kevin Kelly. It will also be touching for you to see this video. And of course, I would also like to welcome everyone who has logged on to watch this webinar, this 5th lecture open disclosure after serious harm. Let's start with some practical announcements. You can also follow this webinar in English. There's a different stream available where we have live simultaneous translation into English. You will find the URL on your screen now. It's umcutrecht.nl/Cullen-lezing. We would also like to invite you to take part in the discussion and to ask questions to our guests in the studio today. And you can do so via two ways. You can send in your questions through webinar@umcutrecht.nl, or you can use WhatsApp using the number 0683132760. We are also recording this lecture, and you will be able to watch the recording afterwards. I will quickly introduce myself. I'm Adrienne Cullen, Professor of Patient and Public Participation, and next to me is Remco van Lunteren, a member of the Board of Directors of UMC Utrecht. Remco, you were also here last year, and you told us you were impressed by the first lecture you attended back in 2018. So this is an environment where mistakes can have big consequences for people. I rewatched the lecture myself, and a key word that appeared often was learning. So where do you situate this learning process, and which developments have you seen taking place these past couple of years? Well, it's a continuous process, and unfortunately mistakes will continue to be made in spite of the disastrous consequences. But as board members, we are more aware of the learning opportunities by engaging in a conversation about prevention and on how we can do things better in the future. And we can also learn from the things that go well. And what I try to do myself is looking at things from the patient's perspective. So how are things going? And from the point of departure of the patient. We call these tracers here internally at UMC Utrecht. And as a board member, this allows you to keep an eye on what you are doing and monitor that. So that way you can learn from events. So just the fact that you have more awareness as a board member that something has gone wrong and that you are involved with that. Last year I learned that this is so important, and this is what we are trying to bring into practice this next edition. And we are dealing with a large organization here, so together you build up a history, of course, and a lot of new people enter, a lot of new professionals that we train. So for this year we thought it would be appropriate to focus on young doctors, because they are also building our organization. And they bring along with them a pair of fresh eyes and a fresh outlook on things. Yes, I think this resembles what Adrienne was mentioning, working from the bottom up. Yes, and one of the most important things is that we have you here and your chair, because you also try to apply this bottom-up approach. So could you tell us more about what you are working on? Yes, I'm also one of the new employees at UMC Utrecht, like many. And my area of expertise, patient participation, makes it a positive thing to get to know the organization internally and to get to work with patients and their stories. because being professor of patient and public participation, I mainly focus on gaining a better understanding of patient participation. And my intention is to generate knowledge around this so that we will be able to take the next step in patient participation. Because we are doing a lot with this at UMC Utrecht already, but we want to embed patient participation even more thoroughly. And of course, we couldn't do this without involving patients, because that's of course what this is all about. So far, I've tried to seek the right connections and really understand people. And this is really important, because this is a way to make sure that everyone's knowledge and expertise fits the situation, so that we can really start working with this. And I also feel privileged to be witness to a patient's story, whether it be for a long or short time. Thank you for being here. Thank you, and thank you for this joint introduction. We hope to be able to offer you an interesting program during this lecture, Open Disclosure After Serious Harm. And now I would like to introduce our next guests, because our next guest is going to tell us a little more about what next year is going to be about, the patient and the young doctor. Shirin Bemelmans, welcome. You are a cardiothoracic surgeon, and you also coach young doctors and also not so young doctors, more senior doctors. And you monitor the quality of healthcare and patient safety. And today, based on your experience as a coach and based on your experience with vulnerability in the system here, you are going to tell us more about that today. So the floor is yours. Thank you. I would have preferred this lecture to exist for a different reason. But this is the way things are. Thanks to Ms. Cullen, we can discuss our mistakes openly, and I will address patients, young and older doctors, with both the Dutch formal and informal form. This year, we focus on vulnerability of patients, young doctors, and more senior doctors, the vulnerability of patients. But what does vulnerability mean? According to the dictionary, it means little protection against harm, which sounds a bit ominous. The way I mean it today, it has a more positive approach. It's more about opening up yourself and maneuvering yourself into a vulnerable position, sharing what you feel and telling people what you find difficult about someone's behavior and what this does with you. You can do this one-on-one or in front of a group, and this is not always easy, because showing vulnerability often goes hand in hand with being vulnerable for someone else's judgment, and this fear often makes it difficult to put ourselves in a vulnerable position. It exists in all forms and shapes. For example, when you need to get undressed in front of a doctor you've never seen before, but also when you want to, as a patient, tell people how you feel when you got a certain diagnosis or a certain treatment. But sharing is not very common, and not everyone feels the need to. And of course, this is not mandatory, but of course it's nice to have the possibility to share if people do feel the need. And fortunately, more and more doctors pay attention to this, and they dare to ask proactively about sharing. looking after your patients and their loved ones and asking about their experience could make a lot of difference in the contact with the patient. How has this appointment been for you? Or did you miss anything? These look like simple examples, but they can have a big influence on the experience of the patient. As a patient, you have a relation of trust with your doctor, and it should stay this way, but a lot of factors can shake up this trust. The most important one being communication, or a lack thereof. Not telling things, only telling half of the story, or not listening to the patient. Of course, we have limited time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't really hear someone. It's about listening, summarizing, and asking more, asking further. This is part of any training on communication, and this is one of the core ways to truly get in contact with your patient. And especially when there have been complications or when mistakes have been made, it's about the human being behind the patient. When there has been a complication or a serious mistake, your feelings as a doctor can be put on hold for a while, but this doesn't mean the same as not showing your feelings during the conversation with the patient. This is not something that makes you unprofessional. No, it makes you a human being. But at that moment, it's not about your feelings as a doctor. Those are not as important as the patient, of course, in this moment. Some people find it easy to place themselves in the shoes of another person, and for some people it's not that easy. There are terms like sympathy and empathy and compassion, and a lot of people look away then. I don't have time for this, or is this really necessary? Or I'm afraid that I'll feel sad myself if I'm involved too deeply with the feelings of the patient. So it's important to gain a better understanding of all of these terms. On the horizontal axis you see the understanding of the other's experience, and the vertical axis shows the willingness to act to support. And you can imagine that someone who doesn't have a lot of understanding and not a lot of willingness to act to support is stuck at feeling pity. One step further is sympathy. I feel for you. This means you show affinity towards the person who's opposite you, and you don't and you don't involve these feelings, you don't project them on yourself. Empathy is more I feel with you. You pay attention to what someone feels in the moment. And to be able to say that you have empathy for someone or that you have compassion with someone, you need to be able to put yourself in the patient's shoes. And compassion is a combination between a willingness to help and the ability to put yourself in the patient's shoes. I think it's important to be aware of the differences between these feelings, because if you're aware of them, it will be easier to see the human being behind the patient. And not just behind the patient. The focus is on vulnerability today. Not only the vulnerability of the patient, but also the vulnerability of the young doctor. Let's start with making young doctors more aware of their vulnerability and the vulnerability of the patient. Like Ms. Cullen said in the video, it's about a bottom-up approach. Only then can you count on integral changes within an institution. If you make mistakes as a doctor, you need to be able to open yourself up. Put yourself in a vulnerable position. And I feel that being human is also an essential part of our profession, besides the medical part of it. And because of the increasing work pressure and administrative load, this is often not really appreciated. You need to care for the people you work with, be genuinely interested in them, and you need to pay attention if someone starts
Dat is een onderdeel dat met name bij de oudere dokters,
a bit absent all of a sudden.
Niet per se
And this is something that wasn't necessarily very important when doctors who are now seniors started in the
ook wij
profession.
oudere dokters, en daar schaar ik mezelf voor het gemak dan ook maar even
But
bij,
this is not an
kunnen veranderen
excuse.
in onze houding naar de jonge dokters.
Senior
mocht dat nodig
doctors
zijn.
can
Het
also
begint met
change their
bewustwording.
attitude towards young doctors as well, and it all
Bewustwording van de
starts
verschillen
with
tussen
raising
medelijden,
awareness,
sympathie, empathie
creating
en compassie.
awareness around the
En hoe mooi is
differences
het dat
between
u als supervisor van
empathy,
een jonge
sympathy,
dokter compassie
pity,
kan hebben
and
met deze
compassion.
dokter als zij of hij een fout heeft
And
gemaakt
how
of denkt
wonderful
deze
is
te hebben
it
gemaakt.
if you can show
Daar is
compassion towards
uitermate weinig voor
someone
nodig.
if
Het
they made a
begint bij het
mistake.
opzij zetten van uw eigen
And this all
oordeel
starts with
over hoe
putting
iets had moeten
aside
gaan.
your own
Opzij zetten van het oordeel dat deze jonge
judgments and
dokter er misschien wel heel
prejudices
anders
about
mee omgaat
something,
dan u
how something
destijds.
should have
In mijn
gone.
tijd, wie van u heeft dat wel eens gezegd of gedacht? Hoewel de neiging van velen zal zijn om de
And I
handeling
think
die heeft
many
geleid tot de potentiële
doctors
fout vooral
will be
inhoudelijk te
tempted
analyseren en misschien wel
to
openlijk te
analyze the
veroordelen,
mistake
werkt het in de
in a
praktijk ook bij
substantial
jonge
way
dokters
and
zo,
to
om de
judge it.
mens achter de jonge dokter te kunnen
But in
blijven zien.
practice, you should also
And
keep
practice
seeing the
makes
human
almost
being behind
perfect.
a young doctor.
Dat zou u moeten aanspreken,
And
aangezien het
practice makes
artsenvak zich tot het
almost
vak met een
perfect.
van de hoogste
This should
percentages
appeal to you
perfectionisten
because
en sterker nog, dat
being a
zou u toch ook
doctor
willen als u zoiets
is a
overkomt.
profession that
Hoe
has
jong
one of
of
the
hoe oud u
highest
bent, u
rates
blijft
of
mens.
perfectionists. So
Als
imagine
supervisor of oudere
what something
dokter
would
is het
be
naar mijn
like
mening ook
if
voor
you
het
made a
grootste deel
mistake.
onze verantwoordelijkheid
You're still a
om een zo
human
veilig
being,
mogelijke
after all.
omgeving te creëren waardoor de jonge dokter het initiatief
As a
durft te
supervisor
nemen
or as a
om
more
bijvoorbeeld
senior
te vertellen
doctor,
dat er
you
iets
need to
verkeerd is
create
gegaan,
a
of
safe
bijna
environment,
verkeerd.
an environment in
Of
which
dat
a
zij
young
of hij
doctor
ergens aan twijfelt.
dares to
Maar wat is
tell
nou
that
eigenlijk veilig?
something went wrong
Het kan
or
een
that they
enorm
have
beladen
certain
woord zijn,
doubts.
zeker in deze tijden, want al
But
gauw is een
what's
omgeving
safe?
onveilig.
This can be a loaded term
Een
because
veilige
an
omgeving
environment
is volgens
is
mij een
deemed
omgeving waar de jonge
unsafe
dokter voelt, en
rather
ja, dat is
quickly.
dus subjectief,
I think young
dat in
doctors
openheid
in a
gedeeld
safe
kan worden over
environment
twijfels,
should
near misses
feel
en fouten.
that they can share their
Dat kan in een
feelings
1-op-1
about
met een
doubts, near
supervisor,
misses,
maar dat
and
kan bijvoorbeeld ook
mistakes
in een hele groep
in
tijdens de
transparency.
overdracht.
And this could be
Wanneer voelt een
one-on-one
jonge
with a
dokter zich nou
supervisor
veilig?
or
De jonge
in a
dokters die
group.
ik hier naar gevraagd heb,
So
gaven
when does a
eigenlijk
young
allemaal
doctor
aan
feel
dat de meeste
safe?
supervisoren
The young
waarbij ze zich
doctors
veilig
I
voelden, de mensen waren die hen vanuit
all
gelijkwaardigheid
indicated
benaderden.
that they
als
felt
mens.
safe with
Dat
supervisors
zorgde er bij hen
that
voor
treated
dat ze
them
zich
from a
kwetsbaar
position
durfden
of
op te stellen.
equality as a human
Dat ze
being.
durfden te delen in hun onzekerheid
This
zonder
allowed
heel
them
bang
to
te zijn
feel
dat ze
vulnerable.
daarop zouden worden afgerekend.
They
Zonder heel bang te
dared
zijn
to
dat daar
share
meteen
their
een oordeel op zou worden
insecurities
geplakt.
without being afraid of
Zonder heel
being
bang te zijn
judged
dat ze daarmee meteen het
and
stempel
without being
incompetent,
afraid
onzeker,
that they would be
ongeschikt of
deemed
noem een willekeurige
incompetent,
negatieve connotatie zouden
insecure,
krijgen. Als jonge dokter
or
ben je in een
not suited for the
afhankelijkheidspositie.
job.
En het kan heel
As a
spannend
young
zijn om je
doctor,
kwetsbaar op te
you
stellen.
have a
Dat
position
betekent
of
dus dat wij
dependence,
als
and
oudere
it can
dokter
be
de eerste
very
stap moeten zetten om die drempel te
scary
verlagen.
to be in a vulnerable
Als je met je
position. So
artsassistenten
as
alleen maar
senior
vakinhoudelijke
doctors, we need
gesprekken
to
hebt, waarin je sterk je
remove
oordeel
the
over beslissingen
barriers.
die anders zijn dan de jouwe naar
So if
voren
you
laat
have a
komen.
conversation
10
with
tegen 1 dat een jonge
an
dokter jou niet
assistant
uitkiest om zich
doctor
kwetsbaar op te stellen.
and you
Nou zullen er dokters zijn die dit horen en
show
denken,
strong
prima, hoef ik
judgment,
ook niet. Dat is ook niet aan
they
mij
probably
besteed, dat geklets over
won't
gevoelens.
choose you to
En
have
dat
a
is prima.
vulnerable conversation.
Ik vind het interessant,
And
omdat
some
we mij direct
doctors
moet
may not
afvragen
feel the
wie
need to
voor
have
jou dat voorbeeld is
conversations
geweest
like
om jezelf op
this.
te stellen. Maar dat terzijde. Overigens, dit betoog over het creëren
And
van een
I find
veilige
this
omgeving
interesting
betekent niet dat we het de
because
hele dag alleen maar
I
moeten hebben
wonder
over
who
gevoelens
your
en
example
veiligheid.
was then.
Alsjeblieft niet. Het betekent dat we ons, zeker de oudere generatie,
This
die echt
plea for
andere
creating a
voorbeelden
safe
hebben gekend,
environment doesn't mean that we
veel
should talk
bewuster
about
mogen zijn
feelings
van
and
het feit
safety
dat de
all
jonge
day
dokters
long.
van vandaag op een andere
No,
manier
please
kijken naar
no,
het
but
vak,
we should
naar
be
de omgang
aware of
met
the
elkaar
fact
en
that
daarin veel
today's
duidelijker
young
grenzen
doctors have a
aangeven.
different view
Daar
on the
waar de
profession
mogelijkheid er is.
and that they have a clearer
Wat
understanding
ik
of their
zojuist heb
limits
benoemd
and they
valt of
indicate
staat in
them
mijn
more
ogen ook met
clearly,
het vermogen tot
at
reflectie.
least when they have the
Van de
possibility to do
supervisor,
so.
maar ook van de jonge dokter. Als je
And
moeilijk in staat
reflection
bent
is
om
also
zelfreflectie
important,
toe te
reflection by
passen,
the
kan het lastig
supervisor
zijn om te leren
and the
van
young
mogelijke
doctor,
fouten.
both of them.
En als je
If
dat als
you
supervisor
are
niet hebt
capable of
geleerd, kan het dus
self-reflection,
lastig zijn om dat te leren aan een jonge dokter.
you learn
voor te
from
doen.
your mistakes. So if
Maar
you
ook
didn't
om
learn
om te
that
kunnen
as a
gaan met een jonge
supervisor,
dokter die
it
dat
could be
wel wat beter
difficult
kan
to
en
show
die zich
how to
daarmee
do
dus ook
this to a
kwetsbaar
young
durft op te
doctor.
stellen. Wat kan er allemaal van binnen gebeuren als je
So what
zelfreflectie
happens
toepast
on
en
the
je om te
inside
beginnen
when
naar
you
jezelf
apply
kwetsbaar opstelt? Een
self-reflection
heleboel.
and you open
Niet alleen maar
yourself up
positief.
to, well,
Volkomen
yourself?
normale gedachten en
A
gevoelens
lot
zijn
can
bijvoorbeeld,
happen,
zie je
and
wel,
not
ik kan
just
het ook helemaal
positive
niet.
things.
Nu komen ze erachter dat ik
Thoughts
helemaal niet zo goed
like,
ben als ze denken.
see, I can't do
Ik kan
this
maar
after
beter
all,
stoppen.
are completely
Als ik
normal.
niks zeg, zeggen is er ook niks gebeurd.
Or maybe I should stop.
Niet
Or
bepaald
if I
helpende
don't say
gedachten.
anything, it's as
Want
if
stel je eens voor dat
nothing
je op deze manier
has
tegen jezelf
happened.
blijft praten op
Thoughts
het
like
moment
that,
dat er iets is
that
gebeurd wat
don't
echt
really
niet de
help.
bedoeling was. Voel je je dan beter of slechter?
But if you keep talking to yourself like this, when something bad has happened that you really didn't mean to happen, will you feel better or worse?
Je hebt zelf de keuze om
I think
te
you'll feel
bepalen
worse.
welke gedachten
But the
en dus
good news
bijbehorende gevoelens
is
je laat
that
overheersen.
the choice is up to you.
En
You
als je
can
dat nog niet zo
determine
goed kan, kun je daar
which
altijd hulp bij
thoughts
vragen.
or
Maar
which
dat terzijde.
feelings
Wat zou er gebeuren als je, nadat
will
je de
dominate.
negatieve gedachten hebt gehad en die vervolgens even laat,
if you
besluit om
put your
helpende
negative
gedachten te
thoughts aside
gedachten
and
als,
decide to
op
think
welk deel
positive
hiervan heb ik
thoughts,
echt invloed?
like
Wat kan ik de volgende keer anders doen?
which
Wat
parts
helpt me om me
can I
beter te
really
voelen?
affect, or what can
En
I do
daarmee bedoel ik
differently
echt niet
next
dat je
time,
juichend door de gang
or
zult
what
lopen na
helps
het
me
maken van een fout.
feel better.
Maar ik bedoel er wel mee
This
dat door
can
dit
help.
soort helpende gedachten de lading er een klein beetje
And
afgaat,
I don't
waardoor er
mean
ruimte
you
ontstaat voor groei. Er ontstaat een
you'll
kleine
cheer
opening
when you walk
waardoor je er een
across the
beetje op een
hallway,
afstand
but
naar kunt kijken.
a
En die
small
afstand is
opening
nodig
will be
om te
created, a
kunnen
small
inzien en
opening
te
that
leren
allows
wat je de
you to
volgende
look
keer
at
anders zou
things
kunnen doen om
from
ervoor
a
te zorgen dat het
distance.
niet meer gebeurt.
And you need this distance to learn
Dit is
from
wat
the
je zelf kunt doen
situation
op het moment
and
dat
to
er iets
prevent it
gebeurt,
from
een
happening
fout of
again
een neer
next
mis
time.
dat niet de bedoeling is. En hoe kunt
So
u daar
this
als
is what you can
supervisor
do
op
when you
reageren?
experience a mistake
Bijvoorbeeld door
or a
dit
near
rijtje af te
miss.
gaan met de
And
betrokken
how can
jonge dokter.
you react to this as a
Ruimte te laten voor de
supervisor?
niet helpende gedachten om het vervolgens
By
naar de helpende gedachten om te kunnen buigen.
looking at
Soms
everything
kan het
together
helpen om
with
voorbeelden
the
te
young
noemen uit uw
doctor.
eigen carrière
And
die
sometimes you
vergelijkbare
can
gevoelens
mention
hebben
examples
opgeroepen.
from your
Hoe
own
kwetsbaar
career
opstellen heet
that
dat.
evoked similar feelings
Daarmee
in
geeft u het
yourself.
voorbeeld aan een jonge dokter dat de
So putting
onfeilbaarheid
yourself
die
in
op
a
een of andere
vulnerable
manier
position.
verweven is geraakt met het doktersvak er een beetje
That
afgaat.
way you
We
can
zijn
teach
namelijk
young
niet onfeilbaar.
doctors that doctors
Dus laten
are
we ons dan
not
alsjeblieft ook
infallible.
niet zo gedragen
So
als we willen
please
dat het
let's
beter
not
wordt.
behave
Want
like
op het
we are
moment dat
if
de
we
jonge
want
dokter
things to
begrijpt
get
hoe het
better.
werkt en de
Because
veiligheid
when
ervaart
the
om
young doctor
kwetsbaar te kunnen en
understands
mogen
how
zijn,
things
komt dat de
work and when
relatie
they
met de
feel
patiënt
safe
alleen maar
enough
ten goede.
to be
Trouwens,
vulnerable,
het
this
vakinhoudelijke
is
deel is ook
positive
uitermate
for the
belangrijk als leermoment
relationship
voor een
with
jonge
the
dokter. Dus ik
patient.
pleit er zeker niet voor om dat buiten beschouwing te laten. Integendeel.
But the substantial
Daar zitten ook
medical
essentiële
part of our
leermomenten
profession
in.
is of course
En daar
extremely
kunnen ook
important
oudere
as a
dokters hiervan
learning
leren.
opportunity
Waar ik
as
voor
well.
pleit, is dat u als
So
supervisor
I'm not
daarnaast
saying we should
ook oog
not
hebt of
consider
houdt
that.
voor de emoties die dat
No,
oproepen
I'm
bij
saying
een
that
jonge,
as a
onervaren
supervisor,
collega.
you should also be aware
Zonder
of the
oordeel over
emotions
die
a
emoties,
young,
zonder er meteen
unexperienced
een sticker
colleague
op te plakken.
can have without
Als wij dit
judging
als
them right
ervaren
away and
rotten in het
without
vak op deze
labeling
manier
them
kunnen
right
doen,
away.
zal de jonge generatie dokters dat
If
zonder meer
senior
overnemen.
doctors are able to
Wij
do
zijn het
this,
voorbeeld
young
voor de jonge
doctors
generatie.
will
Ook in hoe ze iets niet willen. En wat siert een
will
mens op het
do
moment
this
dat
in the
het niet
same
is
way in the
goed gegaan?
future, without a
De
doubt.
mate van
We are an
zelfreflectie om
example
er
to
vervolgens van te
the
leren.
younger
Om
generation,
het de
also
volgende keer beter te willen
regarding
doen.
how they
Stelt u
don't
zich
want
eens
to do
voor.
things.
U komt er na een nachtje slapen achter
Let's
dat de primaire
suppose
reactie die u
that
hebt gegeven aan de jonge collega die iets
After a
kwam
night of
opbiechten,
sleep,
eigenlijk een averechts effect heeft gehad.
you find out
Hoe
that
sterk
your
bent u dan als u
primary
de volgende dag
reaction
naar diezelfde
yesterday
jonge
to a young
collega toe
colleague
durft te gaan en kan zeggen wat uw
had
inzicht geweest
the
is die
opposite
dag?
effect of what you
Of
intended.
misschien zelfs uw excuus kunt
So,
vragen voor de manier waarop u hebt gereageerd. Het aloude
You can appear
adagium
very
see one,
strong
do
if
one,
you
teach one
dare to
gaat
go
ook in
to
deze
that young
context.
colleague the next day to
Dit is
admit
wat we
your
doorgeven.
mistake.
En dat moeten we blijven.
So the adage see one, do one, teach
Want
one also
uiteindelijk is de
applies to
patiënt
this
degene die hier de
context.
grootste
This is
en
what we
belangrijkste
should
vruchten van
pass on
plukt.
and this is what we
Hoe
should
zou de
continue
zorg
to
eruit
do.
zien
Because in the
als het
end,
volkomen normaal zou zijn om op een
patients
open manier te kunnen
benefit from
communiceren
this the
met
most.
patiënten, juist
What
als er
would
iets fout is
healthcare look like if we were able to
Het gebeurt
communicate
gelukkig
with
steeds
patients
vaker, maar we
openly and
zijn er nog lang niet.
transparently? In
Hoe zou het
particular,
eruit zien als de
especially when
dokter zich
things
kwetsbaar
went
durft
wrong.
op te stellen jegens
What
de
would the
patiënt?
future look like if
Zoals
doctors
ik het tot
dare
nu toe
to
heb
be
meegemaakt,
vulnerable
open en eerlijke
towards the
communicatie
patient?
over een fout of een complicatie of
What
een
I've
neermis
experienced so
wordt over het
far
algemeen,
is
en
that
ik chargeer, maar
open
toch
and honest
dermate
communication about a
gewaardeerd door de
mistake or
patiënt
near
dat het de
miss
dokter-patiëntrelatie
is
meestal alleen
appreciated
maar
by
ten
the
goede doet.
patient a lot.
Want ik blijf geloven dat een ieder
So
intentie die in
it
de
only
zorg
has a
werkt, is om de
positive
patiënt te
effect
helpen.
on the relationship between the
Het blijft
doctor and the patient.
mensenwerk, maar
And
dat
I
neemt
believe
niet weg
that
dat we
everyone's
onze
intention
kwetsbaarheid
in
juist mogen
healthcare
laten zien
is
als
to
het
help
nodig is.
patients.
Omdat dat ons bindt.
But we should
Het feit
still
dat we
show
allemaal
our
mens zijn en we
vulnerability
ons
when
kwetsbaar
necessary,
kunnen
because
opstellen.
this is what all connects
Probeer het
us.
eens.
We are all human beings and we can all show our vulnerable side. So try it sometime.
Ook warme lezing vond ik zelf.
Thank you. That was an interesting and warm lecture.
Menselijkheid, want je zegt die is er wel in de zorg.
And maybe this was not so much a call for more humanity, but rather a call for showing more humanity when
Bij
appropriate.
deze opnieuw een oproep aan jullie, aan het publiek.
We
om,
haven't
vragen
received
in
any
te sturen
questions
kan
so
via
far,
e-mail,
but
of
I want
via
to
de telefoon.
invite the audience to send in their
Yes.
questions. You can do this by email
deze lezing, denk ik,
or by
vooral vanuit
using
jouw
your phone.
ervaringen en vanuit jouw
I think this lecture is a result of your experiences as a practicing physician, but also as a coach. It was about vulnerability and also about self-reflection. Could you maybe make things a little bit more concrete for the people at home? So when something happens that you didn't plan, or in hindsight you think things could have gone better, what do you do then? Thank you for your nice words. I have a lot of examples like this. So a large part of this lecture was based on my own experience, but also based on the stories from patients from my practice. I have a concrete example. A couple of years ago, during the night, there was an emergency surgery, a bypass procedure, and I chose a specific construction. I won't go into detail now, but I could also have chosen a different construction. And during the next morning, it turned out that part of the construction kept turning a little bit. And it really shouldn't, so the patient had to undergo surgery again. And in the end, things worked out all right, but I didn't really feel like I did the right thing. So afterwards, I went to the patient and I told them, this was absolutely not my intention, because you already had an emergency surgery during the night, and now you had to have another surgery within 12 hours. So in hindsight, I should have chosen a different construction. And then the patient remained silent for a while. And then he said, the fact that as soon as you found out, you came to my bed and you explained how you felt, that's enough. You've done a terrific job, and things like this happen. So of course it's great that this patient reacted this way, because I've also experienced otherwise, and of course this cannot be blamed on the patient. But patients' reactions cannot always be predicted. So I call on people to be open about situations that you didn't intend. Thank you for telling us about this example. I would now like to create some room for the experiences of patients and their loved ones during today's lecture. And we have the honor of showing you a video by the mother of Joost. She's going to tell us about her experiences in this hospital. Because of a life-threatening condition, Joost has had to undergo a whole range of treatments, and his mother is going to tell us about how she experienced this.
Wij waren vermoeid, wij waren verdrietig, wij moesten alert zijn. Het voelde onveilig. Ja. Toekomst voor je, proost op een huis. Ik ben de moeder van Joost. Joost kan er zelf niet bij zijn. Dit is een foto van Joost, hoe die was. 3 jaar geleden. Joost, 29 jaar, had een mooie reis gemaakt naar Colombia en kwam eigenlijk ziek thuis. In het Jeroen Bosch ziekenhuis werd geconstateerd dat Joost een ernstige endocarditis had, dus een ziek hart. Dus er werd vrij snel contact gezocht met het UMCU. En wij zijn met Joost vertrokken op zaterdag en hij is op zondag met spoed geopereerd. En daar heeft hij een mechanische hartklep gekregen. Ik wel, dan denk ik altijd, gods, wat heb je gebikkeld. Die periode heeft hij goed afgesloten, zo goed dat hij weer terug kon naar het Jeroen Bosch ziekenhuis. En toen bleek dat Joost een hele grote hersenbloeding had. Een gevolg, een complicatie van het gebruik van de antistolling en daarvoor al eigenlijk zijn beschadigd hersenweefsel. Dus dat heeft veroorzaakt dat hij weer met toeters en bellen terug moest naar het UMC. Er was enorm veel druk in zijn hoofd door die bloeding. Dus er moest een drain in, toen moest er een stuk bot uit zijn schedel. Uiteindelijk is Joost 9 keer geopereerd. In die periode is Joost heel veel verhuisd van afdeling naar afdeling. Uiteindelijk heeft zijn hele ziekteperiode 18 verplaatsingen teweeggebracht. We hebben regelmatig meegemaakt dat de medicatie helemaal niet goed was. Dat de dossiers maar half bekend waren. Wij moesten heel erg scherp blijven en zijn, omdat het vaak gemist werd. Hoe vaak wij niet hebben aan moeten geven dat Joost bijvoorbeeld antistolling moest gebruiken. Ja, dat was te veel en te vaak. En dat doet wat met je. Die hele periode kenmerkt voor mij vooral natuurlijk het ontzettende verdriet over Joost. Tegelijkertijd het zo erg voor hem moeten opkomen, dat geeft ook een onveilig gevoel. Dat geeft ook het gevoel dat je denkt, jemig jongens, is er hier iemand wakker? Denk met ons mee, voel met ons mee. Als ik terugdenk aan die periode, denk ik vaak, wij waren vermoeid, wij waren verdrietig, wij moesten alert zijn. Het voelde onveilig en wij voelden ons ook te weinig gehoord. Dat er niet één iemand opstond, dat er niet één arts dacht van hé, het is goed dat ik gewoon met die familie, dat ik het contactpersoon word, dat er één iemand gewoon overal een beetje begrijpt wat er gaande is bij Joost. Dat had geholpen. Ja, en Joost. Tweede opname, en dat was 10 augustus 2019. Toen was daar een assistent op de afdeling. Die zei, familie, goed dat u er bent. Wij spreken met elkaar af. De dagen dat ik er ben, zullen we 5 minuten overdag, aan het einde van de dag, even kort met elkaar een gesprek hebben. Hij koppelde dus ook die informatie terug met zijn opleider, meerdere. Dat deed hij heel goed. Hij kwam voor Joost op. Dat is hoe het zou moeten zijn, denk ik. Idealitair. Ja. Joost die heeft toch wel heel veel beperkingen en heel veel schade. Wat hem het meest in de weg zit is denk ik zijn geheugenprobleem. Hij heeft geen geheugen, geen lange termijn, geen korte termijn geheugen. Dus alles wat Joost doet is elke minuut nieuw. Wij gaan uit van onze eigen kracht, denk ik. Ja, dat wij het leven doen zoals we het doen en dat dit het is. En Joost leeft in het nu. Wij ook zoveel mogelijk. Daarnaast moeten Dick en ik, zijn ouders, natuurlijk wel nadenken over welke stappen zijn er nog en wat kunnen we nog doen in de toekomst. Dit dossier van Joost is zo complex. Daar moet van geleerd worden. Daar moeten mensen veel meer van weten. Want eigenlijk mag dit gewoon nooit meer zo gebeuren. Is dat dan zo dat je een schadeletsel-advocaat erop moet zetten? Dat we 10 jaar met elkaar moeten bakkeleien, procederen? Zou het zo zijn dat een dokter daar uiteindelijk dan beter van wordt? Dat betwijfelen wij. Dat denken wij niet. Wij denken dat we door te spreken en door het dossier van Joost onder de aandacht te brengen en door aan te geven bij elke arts van jongens, kijk hiernaar. Ik denk dat dit heel leerzaam zou moeten zijn voor jullie. Hè? Dat we daarmee meer bereiken.
Heel aangrijpend.
This was a very touching story, so I would like to thank Joost's mother and his family for this contribution. And we are going to reflect on this story in a minute. But first I'm going to welcome our new guests here in the studio, because we are going to have a panel discussion about today's theme, the patient and the young doctor. Because what's the role the young doctor plays when harm is done to the patient? How do you make sure that trust is built up again, and how do you gain trust from the patient again? How can you create a context in which it's possible to reflect on the mistakes? So we are going to have this conversation with Shirin, who's already here, with Fia Chaldella, a physician researcher, and Philip de Vos, oncologist and educator, thank you for being here. But first, let's go briefly back to you, Shirin. You've based your lecture on your own experience as a doctor and as a coach. And then you hear this story. What do you think about this? It's an incredible story, and Joost's mother really voiced well what they needed during his stay at the hospital, and especially what they missed. And it's apparent to me that as doctors we assumed too much. For instance, that everyone was aware of the contents of his file, like the anticoagulants that he needed. And then there is this young doctor who does see what's needed. And he offers the family to have this conversation to keep everyone up to date. And this means that the family's grief can be there, and that they don't need to focus on speaking up for their son all the time. So what this young doctor showed is what I just explained as being compassion. So he showed compassion and immediately took action. So there's a very active component here. And he really represented Joost's interests. So I feel he really did this. He did this very well. And I agree with Joost's mother that paying attention to it this way will bring us a lot more than entering into a 10-year legal procedure. So, as a young doctor, you had 2 experiences during which things went differently than expected. Could you tell us more about that? Yes, thank you. I got a complaint from a patient once, and I was lacking support from my supervisor. And there was one time when I thought that I didn't do things well with the medications, but I did feel supported by my supervisor then. And I noticed that by being able to talk about this immediately, this really helped to put aside my feelings for a minute and to be really able to learn from this. And this allowed me to become a better doctor. But at the beginning, I thought it was really scary to reflect on my own abilities, because what if the conclusion had been that I wasn't that good after all? What then? So, what about the patient? You're talking about acknowledging your own mistakes and reflecting on them. Do you share this process with the patient? Sometimes I do. For instance, by mentioning that I'm not a specialist yet, and by discussing things a day later and feeding things back. And I also reflect on what I see in the patient, something that's happening, maybe something nonverbal, or maybe I've used a word that's not appropriate for the context, and next time I will choose a different word. So patients are also a source of information for self-reflection. Yes, absolutely. Besides learning from my colleagues and my supervisor, I also learn a lot from my patients. Okay, thank you. Philip, you were involved as our supervisor. How do you look back on this? Well, I was glad that Fia immediately came to me, because this tells you something about our relationship. So we are each other's equals. And even if it's something really personal or emotional in that moment, we can find a way through that, work through that together. And Shirin's lecture is still in my mind because so much is on my mind now. During your training, you are learning terms, you're learning all this information, and you're focusing on your exams. So you focus on the substance. Yes, and focusing on being vulnerable. That's something I needed to teach myself, and I've learned that from experience, by trial and error. And now I hope that young doctors will be able to see what I see, that I will be able to impose my norms and values on them. Sometimes this can be an icebreaker, and sometimes you are met with resistance. And then the question is what to do with that resistance. So what I learned is listen to the problem first. Like you said, you should first let these negative thoughts run their course, and then in the end you end up with something positive, a positive outcome. So in the end we said, it's a good thing you are here. Yes, looking back on it, I felt you really paid attention to my feelings. So my feelings were allowed to be there. And then we started to look at how we could have done things differently. And this combination made sure I felt supported. And after the weekend, you asked me whether I'd been able to let things go a little bit during the weekend. And do you feel I was vulnerable? I showed my vulnerable side? Yes, I think the second time you were more forgiving. The first time you told me to make a list of the things that went wrong, basically. And even though I learned from that, the emotions formed a blockage in a way. And the second time, by letting these emotions run their course, we were able to really look at the situation, at the substance of the situation. And this is often what we do during a conversation with the patient. Their emotions are allowed to be there. And of course, you can show them that it's really impactful what they're going through. But when you pay attention to that first, then you can explain to them afterwards what's going to happen with them. Philip, as a supervisor, how do you create a safe environment? Because you told us you immediately felt there was an opening. But what should we imagine? How should we see this? Well, I didn't really learn that myself either. I think in part it's part of my nature. So I try to have an open attitude and welcome people. But sometimes it's a pitfall. When I'm too busy, I'll tell people this is not the right moment. And then I notice I lose credit in a way because the person will think, oh, so when am I allowed to approach you? So I've created this vulnerable side of me, and I will come back to things more in a way like I don't exactly know how to do things the right way. I know something went wrong, but I don't know what exactly. But I'll put that on the table to regain some rest, which we often need in that situation. And sometimes I also tell people about my personal life. Things don't always need to get personal, but sometimes it helps to tell people about your personal life. So sometimes we tell each other about our patients. And, you know, this is allowed to exist. And I hate myself for saying this, but I'm going to anyway. I don't know the name of my cleaning lady. But when she's cleaned my office, I always have a little chat with her and I say thank you. And I'm ashamed that I don't know her name, but this does tell you something about me trying to make that distance as small as possible. So when you have a problem, an issue, you need to look at what didn't go well. And so after this situation with Fia, when I drove back home, I had a good feeling about it because of the way we handled it. And what about building trust with patients? Are there any tips or tools you can share with young doctors? What I always do is try to avoid vague language use and too many metaphors. And you can also start by apologizing. You don't need to turn that into some legal drama, of course, but you need to acknowledge what has happened to the patient. And then you can just let the conversation be the conversation and not have a specific purpose when you enter that conversation. So that's something I want to give people as advice. There's a question from the audience that fits well with this. I'm going to ask it to you both, and by extension maybe also to Shireen, because I think this is something that everyone who works here has experienced once. The increasing workload and work pressure in the healthcare sector. We have a shortage of staff, and how is this related to making mistakes and still being open about that? Does it play a role? And if so, how do you deal with it? Do you experience this pressure, for instance? Well, sometimes my clinic is full, but I do want to have time for every patient. Or at least I want every patient to feel like I have enough time for them. Sometimes I don't have the time, but I still make time for them. And the next appointment, and our appointment will run late. But patients know that I will take time for them. Sometimes you can share the results of a test with someone when you stand next to the bed, or you can sit down next to the bed and sit down for 5 minutes. And I think if you do the latter and if you sit down, I think the family and the patient will feel like I really took the time for them. This is a nice example of showing your human side, showing compassion, and going through a process with someone together. Would you like to add anything to that? I think we all feel the workload in every layer of the organization. Personally, I feel this shouldn't have an impact on patient safety. I think it should make us even more alert on things that don't go well because of this increased work pressure. So maybe we should turn things around and start using this to our advantage, because we know all our administrative tasks take up a lot of our time. So I want to focus on patients and young doctors a little more. You are involved in the Young Doctors Network. So what do you do there? We have the Young Doctors Foundation, by young doctors for young doctors. And with that foundation, we try to make things that would not be discussed before more discussable, so to say. So every year we organize a mistakes festival, and with this we create a safe environment to discuss these moments together, moments at which you thought, oh, this didn't go as planned, or this didn't go as well as I'd expected. And it helps to have doctors from all over the country in one place, because in Utrecht we can learn from something that's happened in Groningen. So we can learn from other hospitals as well. And this way we create a network, a place to go as a young doctor. So we also have a buddy project you can apply for. So let's say you've just started out as a junior doctor and you would like to have a conversation with a senior from your profession to ask about how they do certain things. I was also thinking about training and how within this training we can create an environment in which this is possible. Because with doctors in training to become specialists, there's quite a lot of pressure on them to perform, or even to perform perfectly. And the pressure to perform well because you are not there yet, this creates a lot of added pressure and competition maybe. So how can you create a climate in which transparency and openness have a place? What's important is that not every young doctor has been formed the same way. Everyone has their own history, culture, norms and values. And I think it's important for senior doctors to realize that the question we should ask when someone trains with us is, who is this person? And what do they need from me to accomplish the objectives they have set for themselves? And as a professional by experience, you can start steering in a certain direction. And of course you grab the low-hanging fruit first, but it's good to realize that we have not all been formed in the same way. Senior doctors, neither. And sometimes when the match is not good, you need to take the time to look at this together, how to improve it. Let's go more into detail about this, because there's a question from the audience that fits in with this nicely. Because you can also add to your work pressure by involving the patient, by getting to know them and understanding what's important to them. Do you have experience with this? How closely do you work together? And is this a process you go through together? In our case, we usually have shorter periods of contact with the patient. To put it very flatly, we are more on the side of the execution. So as cardiothoracic surgeons, we have a very short yet intensive relationship with the patient. And I think it's not necessarily about how long you have contact with someone, but what you discuss during the moments that you speak with the patient. They co-decide about their treatment, but when surgery starts, they cannot tell me which direction I should go in to close the stitches, for example. But co-decision making is playing an increasingly important role in other disciplines. As a young doctor, do you feel there's this shift happening? I do feel that it's becoming more and more about co-decision and having a connection with the patient. You have a treatment relationship with the patient, but really looking at it that way too. Thank you so much. I think we are nearing the end of this broadcast, unfortunately. And I would also like to share that we would like to thank Joost and Joost's mother for their contribution today, and also, by extension, Peter Klasky. His sympathy, empathy, and compassion, he would like to extend these to the mother of Joost and Joost's loved ones, because of course he recognizes the situation. This is a theme that remains interesting, and we've also noticed this because of the participants, the people who are watching this session, over 160 people. So we should keep paying attention to this. So maybe some closing words from my side, and I'm referring to the title of a working document, Less Patient, More Human Being. And in summary, I think we should draw a parallel to less doctor, more human being, if I'm allowed to summarize today like that. Thank you to the people who are present here. Fia, Philippe, Shirin, thank you for your contributions. And of course, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Adrienne Cullen, who even after her passing away keeps encouraging us to learn from our mistakes as a hospital, so that we won't keep repeating the same mistakes, and so that we can learn from them to prevent them in the future, and so that we won't cause any extra harm to patients and their loved ones who already find themselves in a very tough situation. I hope that this past hour has contributed in a constructive way to the theme of open disclosure after serious harm. You can watch the recording of this session, and I would like to wish you a good weekend.